Medieval mode is a fun game mode. It's just nice to play a game where you only have your melee weapons to smack the opponents around with. It may not be super in-depth, but how else am I gonna farm my strange melee weapons? The game mode was added during the 2010 Australian Christmas update, and in it included one map, the Groot Keep. And for the past 13 years, it has been the sole map for medieval mode. No other game modes, no other maps, and it's only gotten minor tweaks here and there. There was brief talk of a community medieval mode update, but only a few cosmetic items got added. To my knowledge, that was the last real update to the game mode that it was ever going to get. To me, that is insane. There are game modes that are being added today that stray further and further away from what TF2 originally is, and there was rumors of even further removal that was gonna happen. What sucks is that I don't think that the medieval mode should have been treated as such an afterthought when Valve is ready to push out several maps that weren't ready to be released yet. TF2 has been adding a ton of maps year by year. Too many in my opinion. There was a ton of maps added during Halloween, a lot during the winter update, and I haven't even played all of the summer maps yet. In addition to this, we've been seeing new game modes brought into the game recently, which while it's great people are making new game modes to be put into TF2, it's not so good when it divides the player base further than it did before, and for all these maps and game modes people worked on only to get thrown into that section of the game. TF2 has a lot of game modes, all with varying degrees of people taking them seriously. You have game modes like King of the Hill and 5CP being found in competitive lobbies more often, and on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have game modes like Capture the Flag, where you're just doing nothing except goofing off for the most part. But then, beneath these game modes where most of the player base resides in, you have the dusty basement that is the afterthought game modes, the alternative game modes. The alternative game modes is the cutting room floor of game modes. Once you get past this line, there's no going back. You're in no man's land. This area is just a homeless shelter for abandoned maps. When's the last time you've played on Probed, or Two Fort Invasion, Pastime, or Manpower? Nobody goes here. All these new maps you see the team add, you know they're going to go down here. All it does is spread the player base even further. Aside from Hightower, you have maps that people don't play too often. And by don't play too often, I mean fucking never. I'm more than sure most of the people who started playing the game recently don't even know about the other payload race maps, so instead of letting a bunch of other new game modes make TF2 into something that it isn't, I'd rather add to something that is already well established in the game and actually fits more into the original vision of TF2 rather than a bunch of random party game modes being turned into playable games. I want to play an FPS, not prop hunt. We have some game modes that aren't found in the game too often, and one of them being medieval mode. It is a game mode where you're limited to your melee weapon, with a few exceptions. It's not super in-depth, but I'd rather play this than Pastime for God's sakes. It's a simple game mode with not too much crazy stuff happening. But it is weird that it got one map for it, right? Like there are other maps that were being made that felt like they gotten further along the line than medieval mode. So I propose a question. If medieval mode got one more update, what would it be? Well, before we get too far into the discussion, we should probably put some limitations. We don't want to see the same mistakes made with the last few holiday updates. If there actually was a new medieval mode update, there would be 8 maps added, and one of them being passable. So instead of adding several, the update should be about one map. That way, instead of all the time being spent in several areas, you have one map that fits the game well. Now, I'm not a map maker. One of my favorite maps is Harvest, and that map objectively sucks. But if the update is about one map, it should probably be about a large map, sort of like a map with multiple points to capture, or if we're getting fancy, we can go with the snowplow route, where you can capture several points and push a cart forward. Instead of a cart, you can maybe have a wall that you can punch down with your weapons. The map should definitely be the main presentation, since the game mode is so lonely with just the one map. There should be areas where people are fighting for the objective, along with flank routes for the other classes trying to sneak behind, just like any other good map. But there was one other thing in the medieval mode update that got touched on too. Demo Man turned into Demo Knight, so the Demo Man is able to replace his sticky bomb launcher with a shield and is able to charge towards his enemies. Now I joined a little after this update came out, so this was always a possibility to me, but seeing this back in the day must have been mind-blowing for the community. But that's the thing, what if the class has got a complete makeover for this mode specifically, where people actually main this class that came out of this game mode? So I want to do something similar to another class. The Engineer is the building class of the game. He builds sentries, dispensers, and teleporters. If you go into any casual game, you can find several of them, but in medieval mode, he's sort of not here. Why is that? Well, for starters, you have to look at the main part of his class. He builds things with technology, which wasn't a thing in medieval times. so the main part of his class is now missing. Topping that with an average walking speed and the lowest health pool mixed with underwhelming unlocks in the context of this game mode, you get a class that is objectively the worst here. He has no purpose. Even Pyro has more of a purpose, and he doesn't really even have one in the main game. So what can we do with the engineer? Well, technically, with the release of the new map-making tool VScript, the sky's the limit. But remember what I said about needing to stay within the main vision of TF2? This game is quite special, no other game is like it. So going beyond the initial silliness of the game will tarnish the game's iconography. So if anything should be done, engineers should be able to create something simple. We don't want the engineer building giant contraptions, that's too outlandish. Instead, the engineer should be building things like ladders or stairs. You could have piles of debris that the engineer can work on and make a little station or tool for the other players. Like imagine you need to scale a wall, so you have an engineer help you over the wall with him building a ladder. Or you can make a ramp for the demo knife to trip with. You can have him build something simple for the scout to jump on, really anything small that doesn't mess with the map itself too hard. I'm hesitant to say it should be a new item rather than a part of the map. For starters, Valve doesn't like working on this game past adding maps, so that isn't gonna happen. Secondly, I'm not sure how well this idea would fit outside the realm of medieval mode. You can have a map that's properly designed for this core idea. You can have the items be small that can be placed anywhere, but again, this might lead to older maps getting broken. But having a new idea for engineer would be better, I feel, for the game. I mean shit, if Breadspace is in the game, then certainly that this small little change to an alternative game mode wouldn't be terrible to add now, would it? But ignoring that, we have to talk about one thing that's very important. In medieval mode, you cannot use any technology. Since there was none at the time, it makes sense. So with that fact stated, why does the spy get to use his invisible watches in this mode? How is that fair at all? I know the sentry guns would be way more overpowered to keep due to the fact that they're, guns. But why is the spy able to go invisible at all? The spy should be able to cloak whatsoever. It doesn't make sense that he can. While there are other items that don't make sense, at least you can say, alright, at least it's just a melee weapon, at least it's not doing something a medieval weapon can't. The spy's watch allows him to go invisible seemingly whenever, so I don't think he should be able to cloak. But I don't want to take something away from the spy without giving at least some solution to the metaphorical damage I just caused. So I have a bit of a solution. Why not add in areas where the spy could hide? Like areas where it's hard to identify enemies like the haystacks in Assassin's Creed games, or areas like bookshelves where he can hide. Am I asking too much of the map editor? Very much so. I could possibly be dead wrong with what this thing is able to do, but it's still something. So what's the point of this video? Why am I talking about a game mode that got added over a decade ago with no real update? Well, TF2 is going into sort of a crisis mode, where it doesn't know what's going on. Say if TF2 went nowhere, and now the game is just getting added a mountain of maps and new game modes seemingly each update. Thankfully this update did not bring Prop Hunt, that would legit be awful for the game's future. But why is that? Well, the reason why it's important is because TF2 is one of the few shooters that people play nowadays that feels like it has a reason to exist. The gameplay feels good and satisfying, it feels fun to move around with the characters, and any game you watch, no matter how good the players are, you can understand what's going on. It's not random nonsensical stuff like Prop Hunt or Zombie Invasion. Not to say they're bad or that they don't have their place, but that's not TF2. If Prop Hunt got added, it would have been of several maps and it wouldn't have worked on launch, and after the initial showing, no one would play it, just like the last two game modes. So instead, I'd rather have a new map in a game mode that people are familiar with, rather than a whole new game mode that people aren't familiar with, getting several maps that don't work. I don't want this video to seem overly bitchy about the recent events of TF2, but I just don't want to see this game get changed so much to where it just feels like a husk. I played Overwatch recently, and it looks like a mobile game made for PC. With all the random ass microtransactions, battle passes, and the 40 million things it's trying to grab your attention with, and I kinda feel like the same thing is happening in TF2, just a bit more subtly. But if the subtle parts of these kind of updates go under the radar, they get unsubtle at a point when it becomes too late. So I'd rather not continue this game as a random ass game mode edition every update. But I just wanted this out there. I wanted to make sure that the most pressing issue in the game's history gets addressed. I can't think of a single thing more depressing than this. There is not another pressing issue that is looming over this game's head. Though, what are your thoughts? Is my idea stupid, or is there still gas in the tank of this decade-old long car that is medieval mode? Let me know your thoughts. I don't want this to be too negative towards the creators of the new game modes. It's just that these really aren't what TF2 are to me, and I don't want the game becoming like Fortnite or GTA Online or Roblox. There's a core idea to what TF2 is, and it isn't random games. I'd rather the VScript mapmaker revamping older game modes, rather than adding new ones that don't really fit with the original idea of the game itself. But before I get lost in that random point again, I'd like to thank you for watching. I'm going to be working on different stuff for this game that isn't medieval mode, I promise, but after playing it for several hours to get the footage, I had some questions about it rambling in my head. So I hope that this however long video was entertaining enough for everyone. See ya!